This month, Vogue Business has been publishing a series called Debunking the Dream. It's all about the realities of working within the fashion industry, specifically on the corporate side. So far, it hasn't discussed garment workers or retail employees, warehouse workers, any of them. But the jump off for the series is a survey of 600 fashion professionals, specifically on the corporate side. So I suspect this series will stay there. But I'm not mad about that because I think we don't talk enough about what it's really like to work in fashion. And I'm excited for that to change because the patterns are the same throughout the industry. I always say where there's smoke, there's assholes. And if you're treating your garment workers poorly, you're also treating every other worker who helps you make money poorly, right? It's a fascinating series as someone who has worked within the industry for so long and honestly hopes to never return to it. So please talk me out of it if I'm talking about getting back into it. A lot of the issues that fashion workers face, they're underpaid, they're overworked, there's no work-life balance, there are bad managers, favoritism, nepotism, racism, classism, ableism, feeling disposable. These are not unlike just about any other job out there. But what makes it different is that fashion has this patina of glamour, that workers within it should be honored to be underpaid and overworked because it's fashion. In her 2020 book, The Most Beautiful Job in the World, Lifting the Veil on the Fashion Industry, anthropologist Julia Menciatieri wrote, "There is a magical power that fashion has. When people enter the industry, they have an idea that is more of a projection as a consumer. But once inside, they deconstruct part of that image. You last in these structurally unequal situations, and you endure free labor because you think you will reach your dream at some point. The dream and the exploitation are interconnected." And she's right, because the world as a whole feels that fashion is so glamorous, right? When I tell people what I do for a living, they assume I live some glamorous, fabulous life. And when you join that career path, that industry, you have that preconceived notion that it is glamorous and special, and you are lucky to be there. Menciatieri's book primarily focuses on the French fashion industry, but it could be about working for a big fast fashion brand and still make the same statements. You would just swap out Chanel purse for, I don't know, American Eagle tote bag? Okay, maybe not. Anyway, if there's one takeaway thesis from her book, it's, I'm just lucky to be here. And that's how I felt for so long. And it was how we were encouraged to feel. We had someone's dream job. I was once told there are 100 girls ready to take your job tomorrow if you don't want it. I worked in a buying office at my first buying job with a guy who worked in the men's section who told me he could get any woman he wanted. Well, he called them girls. He could get any girl he wanted by just telling her where he worked and what he did. And there was this implied magic of it all, that we were chosen to be here. And as a result, we shouldn't question anything. We don't question things, at least we don't question them out loud. We take on more and more work. We watch what we work on become more and more diluted from the original vision. Yeah, that's hard. It never gets easier. And we continue to reach as hard as possible, even if it means pulling our arms out of their sockets for just a moment. We reach as hard as we possibly can to achieve the ever more impossible to reach goals our employers set for us. Because guess what? If they were more easily achieved and we achieved them, they'd have to pay us more money. And we rarely, never, unless we're drunk at happy hour, talk about how fucked up it all is. Because fashion strangely silos you from one another. You can't really talk about these things, and definitely not in the office. It seems like maybe finally these conversations, the ones that I've only had with former coworkers or coworkers who were on their way out, they're finally being had in a bigger way. And I hope that it continues. We need to dismantle this illusion of glamour being associated with clothing. So back to this Vogue Business series. The article I read today is called, "Is Working in Fashion Going Out of Style?" And I'll link to it in the show notes. And this article says, why is the dream crumbling now? A number of factors are converging all at once. Overproduction isn't just affecting the environment, it's affecting the people propping up the fashion industry. More clothes, more trend cycles, and more pressure to make things bigger and better on tighter budgets and timelines are causing people to burn out at an alarming rate. This has only been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, during which industry leaders promised to slow the pace of the industry. These promises remain unfulfilled, and the socioeconomic conditions facing workers are even worse than before. Reading this piece was like a more succinct version of my experiences over the last, say, 10 years of my career. And it echoed so many conversations I have had with many friends who have also worked in the industry. But one thing that always comes up in these conversations is, it wasn't always that way, and it just got worse over time. We couldn't see it then as it was starting to happen, as it was in the middle of happening. But as we know, hindsight is always a super sharp 20/20 view. What changed everything, what we lived through, was the rise of fast fashion. And it changed everything. What people bought, how it was sold, and how the industry worked. Welcome to Clothes Horse. I'm your host, Amanda, and today I'm going to be talking about how clothing is made and sold has changed over the span of my career, over all of our lifetimes, and not even a major big section of our lifetimes. I'm going to talk about how it has impacted all of us, regardless of where we work, live, or the clothing we wear on our bodies, because this really does impact us all. When I began working on this, I really thought I could cover it all in one episode. Yep, that's a nope, and it's such a classic Clothes Horse quandary for me. This always happens. Never forget the Etsy episode that I thought would be 1 that turned into 4. So yes, this episode will not be 4, I promise. It will actually be part 1 of 2. There's just too much to talk about, and I don't want to skip over anything. And also, this episode alone was like a 25-page paper that I had to write for it. And I was like, not ready to go all the way to 50 this week. So next week, we'll be going even further, kind of up to where fashion has evolved. So in the first half, this week, I'll be talking about the rise of fast fashion 1.0, which I mentioned in the last episode, how that impacted everyone, everywhere, seriously. And we'll even learn who coined the term fast fashion. Not gonna lie, I was kind of surprised. If you're a longtime listener, well, first off, thank you for continuing to listen to me talk every week. Then you already know that I did not plan for a career in fashion. Yes, I always loved clothes. Like from a very small age, I loved getting dressed every day. Yes, I put a lot of thought into what I wore, which was primarily all the wildest stuff I could find at the thrift store. But fashion always felt like a place for people who were not me. People who were prettier, thinner, more charismatic, popular, that kind of stuff. The things that make us, live in our mind to remind us of how inadequate we are every day, even though those voices that are telling us that might not be very honest. To me, I was just the weird, smart kid with wild outfits. And as an adult, I was the broke single parent who hauled my kid around town on my bike and primarily lived on a diet of quesadillas and 25-cent cheese bagels from Fred Meyer. I cut my own hair. I exclusively wore secondhand clothing. I didn't go on glamorous vacations. I'm glad social media barely existed because no one would have wanted to see what my life was really like. I barely knew anything about designers, but certainly could tell you everything about the history of hip-hop or the nuance of metal subgenres. I wasn't a fashion person. I just really liked personal style, I guess. Clothes? I'm not sure. So how I ended up with a career in fashion, and I have to pause here and say, to be fair, we're not talking high fashion here, but I did end up working for some of the most iconic millennial brands. So yeah, it's fashion. It's just not fashion, but strangely it behaves like it's fashion. Anyway, how I ended up working in fashion was surprising. I was working in a store for a big hipster retailer. I want to say at that point they had about 100 stores. They have more now. They're part of a larger conglomerate of fast fashion brands. And coincidentally, at the time my career in fashion began, I was approaching a major fork in the road. I'd started working there a few years prior as a seasonal part-time sales associate, meaning I think I was hired to work for back to school and they were going to lay me off in like September, I think. I know many of you have heard this story before, but let's just review it for the new listeners. I think it's all part of the story here anyway. So my first day at this job was on my birthday. I'd moved to Portland, Oregon about a year previously with my 1-year-old baby, Dylan. Dylan's father, Ryan, had died very suddenly and shockingly, life-alteringly, tragically a few months before Dylan was born. And that changed everything. I moved home with my mom in rural Pennsylvania for a few months to pick up the pieces, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I wouldn't stay there. And Portland, Oregon, with its huge trees and snow-capped mountains, it felt like a magical place that would help me heal from the just never-ending grief I was experiencing. I knew I would never get better living back home with my mom for a multitude of reasons. That's a different podcast. And so I made that move across the country with a small baby and very little money. A year later, it had not been a successful move so far. I didn't feel better at all. I had a brief and very abusive relationship. I was broke. I couldn't get hired anywhere. As soon as they saw me walking with the baby, it was over. I was selling my books and clothes in order to buy groceries and diapers. And the first of the month, aka rent, was a dreaded day for me. Dylan and I were living at that time in an apartment that cost, hold on to your pants here, $480 a month. Can you imagine? What a time. Dylan slept in the bedroom and I tried to sleep on a secondhand futon in the living room. I was bathing Dylan in the kitchen sink because we didn't have a bathtub. And in hindsight, it's all very twee and charming. Really, it was a cool vintage apartment, tiny. I still remember when I think of these memories, when I picture that apartment and living in it, I still remember my constant anxiety. In fact, it's so strong if I just close my eyes and picture myself sitting on that secondhand futon. Every moment I worried what would happen to us next. I finally got this job as a part-time seasonal sales associate at the hipster retailer by walking in and saying, "Hey, are you hiring? I worked here in college, but in New York City." Here's the thing. When I said, "Are you hiring?" I saw the woman at the cash register look at me, then look at the stroller, then look back at me, and she was gonna say no. And then I said, "Yeah, I used to work here in college, but in New York City." And then the door opened for me. And so here it was, my birthday, my first day at this job. And I stood under an air conditioning vent all day, becoming progressively more stuffed up. It was just blowing God knows what into my sinuses. And I was just folding t-shirts over and over again and counting items in and out of the fitting rooms. If you've never worked retail, let me tell you how that worked. The routine was very simple. I would take the customer's items. I would count them. I would take them to the fitting room. I would go inside before the customer, ostensibly to hang their items on a hook, but really to ensure that there was no evidence of theft from the previous customer. Then, when the customer came out, I would take their items, count them again, put them up on the rack where I would straighten them later, and then I would go back in the fitting room. And I would look under the seat, behind the mirror, up above for any evidence of theft, like hidden security tags that had been ripped off. I did this over and over again all day, and the doors of the fitting rooms loudly slammed closed no matter how gentle I tried to be. So the day was just a cacophony of slamming doors and the postal service and counting to 7 over and over again, climbing up on the seat to look above the fitting room, climbing on the ground to look underneath, hanging, folding, counting, hanging, folding, checking, counting, climbing, counting, checking, folding all day long. I did this for 12 hours until a manager appeared to ask me how long I'd been working. And I said, I've been here since 8 a.m. All I could think about was the $96 before taxes that I had just made that day, which was like a fortune to me. I was like, oh my God, this is like 20% of my rent in one day. I'm getting rich off of this job. I moved up the chain of command in that store both fast and slowly. On one hand, everybody knew I was responsible, I was hardworking, I was a nice person to work with. People liked me and wanted to promote me. But for a while, I was held back because my defaulted student loans, which, by the way, still could not afford to pay while working at this job, those defaulted student loans meant that I could not be promoted because every promotion with this company, including working in the stores, had a credit check attached to it. If I could pass that credit check, I could become officially full-time and probably start paying on my student loans. I could get health insurance and paid time off, but corporate wouldn't make an exception for me. Even though the only bad thing on my credit was my student loans, I always paid everything else. The student loan people had just not wanted to work with me. Eventually, I did get that promotion after a brutal interrogation from the regional loss prevention manager, a scary-ass former cop named Tony, who asked me why he should trust someone who made so many life mistakes. I don't know what he thought the life mistakes were. Was it not paying my student loans, or was it being a single parent? To be honest, the implication was pretty clear that it was being a single parent. The student loans didn't really come up as much. That said, I don't care. I could say other things about that guy, but trust me, they're not good. Anyway, I got the promotion. And Dylan and I were able to move into a bigger place with 2 bedrooms and a bathtub. Luxury. We weren't rich, that's for sure. We were still living extremely paycheck to paycheck. I was so terrified. I remember actually I had a skateboard and I sold it to someone because I worried that I would ride the skateboard, fall, break my arm, and not be able to work or take Dylan anywhere on my bike. Like, how would Dylan get to daycare if I couldn't hold onto my bike with my arm? And I worried. I was like, well, then we'll be homeless, so I don't get to skateboard anymore, that reminds me of a meme. It's not even a meme. It was someone's social media post that was reposted on Reddit. And it was basically like, when we talk about poverty, what it means to be poor, we talk a lot about food and shelter and clothing and education, like the basic needs. Of course, these are all really, really important. But we don't talk about how we spend all of our time trying to secure those things so we can survive. And that means we don't get to go swimming or learn how to ride a bike or how to ride a skateboard. We don't get to have hobbies or passions or play instruments or read books or do things that give us joy because we're so focused on surviving. And that really resonated with me because it's only been in the past few years that I've been able to make that space to do things that interest me, but I still don't ride a skateboard because I do worry about how I'll type with a broken arm. Anyway, so we were still living extremely paycheck to paycheck at that point. Anything could have ruined us at any time. In the winter, for example, I would only use the heat in Dylan's bedroom while I slept in a coat and a sleeping bag in my room, because after we'd gotten the first utility bill in the winter, I realized that we couldn't afford the luxury of central heat, only location-specific heat. And if I ever got really cold, I would just go sleep on the floor in there. Yeah, it was true that I was working 40 hours a week and working really, really hard at it. But we couldn't afford heat. I couldn't see the eye doctor. We couldn't afford to take the bus. I definitely was not ever going to get rich off of this job, and no one was, right? Not even rich, just to be comfortable and less worried. It's a feeling I didn't get to have for a really long time, and every time I got to feel a little bit more comfortable and less worried, something would come in and change that for me. And I'm talking the entire span of my career in fashion. There was never a sense of security, ever. So I became a department manager later that year, which paid more, but was salaried, which meant I was expected to work at least 50 hours a week, many, many more during the holidays and floor sets. And I would often clope in, sorry if I'm triggering any of you past or current retail workers by talking about the clope in. For those of you who don't know what that is, it means you close the store and then you come back and open. And so where I worked, that would mean that I would work until about 11 or midnight and then start again at 7 a.m. It was brutal. And it didn't feel like we had much more money, primarily because I still was paying daycare for all those extra hours that I was required to work, but I wasn't being paid more money. And I'm pretty sure that first manager job, once again, where I was required to work minimum of 50 hours a week, I think it paid $24,000 a year. Like it was not much. And then to support a child on it, it was really, really difficult. A lot of my coworkers who were managers at that point, they were obviously facing the same financial struggle, even though they didn't have kids. And they survived, and I use that in quotes, by utilizing a lot of really predatory payday loans. That's how they kept themselves going. It was rough. The way I looked at it is that it was a path to somewhere. I didn't know where, but certainly this would lead to something down the road, right? Like, don't you have to get experience to get other jobs? And that's what I would keep telling myself, that it wouldn't always be like this, that it would be better at some point. But after a year or so of doing this, probably more like 2 years, something about the job just wasn't sitting well with me. For one, it was nearly impossible to get more than the most minuscule raise. Like the biggest raise I could give anyone on my team who was hourly was 25 cents an hour. And I could only give that to one person. Everyone else would get 10 cents an hour. It was like if you worked 30 hours in a week, you made a whole $3 extra each week before taxes. Neither the 25 cents nor the 10 cents made life easier for any of them. We were also asked to cut payroll more and more, despite our store being busier and busier. This was a time in this company's history where it was basically like printing its own money. All my friends and I who worked for the company at this time would talk about how everything was a bestseller and we never had enough. We were just selling. We were like owning that area of consumer appetite. We were just like, it was wild. And yet we were supposed to cut payroll. And that meant that the hourly staff would have to be cut back, work less hours, right? The store was still there. It was still busy and still needed to run. That meant all of us who were salaried had to work even more hours. So suddenly I'm in this position where the company that employs me is making money just like hand over fist. They are just printing their own money, as we said. And I am actually more broke because I'm spending more of my paycheck on daycare so I can work more hours, but I'm not being paid more, right? So I actually see my quality of life declining as I'm trying to figure out how to work for all this daycare. And it honestly turned into a situation in which Dylan was spending more and more time with my mom in Pennsylvania than with me in Oregon because I didn't know how to make it work financially. I was also told, as the person who wrote the schedule for the entire store, about 60 people, to ensure that no one ever got close to 30 hours per week on average, because the company did not want to be forced to offer benefits. So if someone had been working 30 hours a week for a month or so, I had to give them a week of like 5 hours, which of course would fuck them over financially because just like me, they were living paycheck to paycheck as well. And when one paycheck is just for 5 hours, what are you supposed to do? It felt so unfair. And additionally, I was encouraged to schedule the people who had worked there the longest for the least amount of hours. Why? Because they were paid slightly more per hour. So there was no reward for sticking around, right? No matter how long you worked there, it was still going to suck, you know? I saw a lot of weird stuff around hiring, firing, disciplinary action, loss prevention stuff that felt possibly illegal or at the very least unethical. And it felt gross that the company considered us criminals first and employees second. We had to be searched every time we left the store, pulling up our pants to show our ankles, pulling out our pockets, allowing managers to look through our bags. We couldn't use the bathroom without someone letting us in. It all felt really not good at all. And I knew at my core that all of us, even me, were super disposable. The company didn't care about us. We were just bodies doing a job. So after working in the store for a few years, getting to this like managerial level and feeling like, okay, like things should be getting better. I'll keep plugging away at it. Maybe it will. I had reached this point where I was like, do I want to continue doing this forever? Because there really wasn't that much growth potential beyond my current job. And it would always kind of be the same thing, right? And eventually, upper management would deem me too old or too expensive to work there. So I decided I was going to go to nursing school. It was a way to support myself and Dylan and kind of live anywhere we wanted. It would give us a level of security. I knew it was a job that hired all the time, right? As I was working on applications and making plans at the store, we had a visit from some executives from the home office. Now, I make this sound super casual, but we worked around the clock for a week leading up to it. We were memorizing data, cleaning every corner of the store, re-merchandising over and over again. Long nights, washing the floors, cleaning the thermostat. We didn't know what they were going to want us to look at, so everything had to be perfect. So I do this walkthrough, which, trust me, I had studied and rehearsed quite a bit. And at the end, the director of planning and allocations, a lovely man named Kelly, he asked, how would you like to come to work for us in Philadelphia as a buyer? It was not what I expected to hear at the end. I still can't believe that this happened, actually. I had no idea what that question, that statement meant, and Philadelphia was awfully far away, but I said sure. I assumed it was just a compliment, nothing would come of it, but a week later, I was flying across the continent for an interview. If there was ever anyone in fashion who felt lucky to be here, it was me. All of my coworkers came from money. They had perfect teeth and wore very expensive clothes. I still haven't worn clothes that are that expensive in my lifetime. I probably never will. I showed up for my first day in a thrifted Boy Scout shirt and a brown corduroy jumper, my bangs cut by myself. I look at the picture sometimes and I'm like, I could have done a better job there. I couldn't have been more out of place. And all my coworkers, they'd gone to fashion school or interned for fancy brands or had their own handbag line. And all I can say is that I had worked in the store for a really long time and I really understood the customer and I had a really great eye for product and I'm really good with numbers. And now that I'm saying this all aloud, wow, they were really lucky to have me. Many of them expected me to fail. There definitely was a strong belief that anyone working in the stores must be less intelligent, have bad taste, be unable to work in a corporate environment. Oh my God, every buying office is full of classism. But it really just all goes back to this idea of like if you're working in fashion, which no matter how many stores your fashion company has, is considered separate from working in retail, There is this belief that you are special to be there, right? And so you are different than the people who are actually out there selling the stuff that you're buying. I don't feel that way, but that was a very strong belief there and everywhere else I worked. I was the first person to transition from the stores to the corporate office in this big company in more than 10 years. I learned later that my boss hadn't wanted to hire me for the reasons, those classist reasons that anyone who worked in the store certainly couldn't be special enough to work in fashion, but she felt pressured by the executives to hire me, so she did. And I felt that very strongly. My boss sat 10 feet away from me, but only communicated via email. I would go an entire 8-hour day without another human speaking to me. It was quite an adjustment from working in the store where I had so many friends and we had so many jokes and we talked every time I passed by. But it was also a relief to not be on my feet all day and carrying boxes and moving fixtures and running up and down the stairs. My body needed that break. My body needed to no longer have to be the one who climbed in the dumpster to stomp down all the cardboard. I just needed to do normal human activities every day. The other thing about this job is that I only received a $4,000 raise to move across the country and live in a much more expensive city. So actually, taking this job put me in a worse financial situation than working in the stores had. Many days after I deducted what I needed for rent, bills, everything, I only had $10 to spend. And $5 after I deducted the cost of taking the subway to and from work. There were no 25-cent Fred Meyer cheese bagels to be found, so I was eating budget gourmet meals or ramen for dinner. But I only ate that at home because I didn't want my coworkers to know how poor I was, because somehow they magically could afford like a $15 lunch from the cafeteria every day. At work, because I didn't want people to know how bad it was for me, I would buy a cup of soup from the cafeteria and I would eat it with as many free saltines as possible while sitting by myself in the cafeteria. It was really hard. I guess that's just what I will say. That first year at that job was really, really hard, and I regretted taking it so many times because it felt like life had become harder. It wasn't even the same amount of hard. It was harder. It definitely wasn't easier. And I just kept reminding myself that I was lucky to be there, right? I would eat that cup of soup with saltines all by myself, and I would go back to my desk, trying not to worry about money, and I would write orders for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It felt so disconnected from what my life really was. Over time, I did get some raises, but I want to be clear that working as a buyer has never made me rich. It's never made any of my friends who were buyers, designers, production people. It's never made any of us rich, despite title changes, promotions, more and more responsibilities, less and less of a work-life balance. For me, it made me more middle class, maybe over time, but barely. And as I mentioned earlier, every time it would seem like I was finally maybe going to be okay, all of that would be ripped away from me by my employer. And that's a story I'm going to tell you time and time again in today's episode. Making your own clothes can give you the freedom to wear exactly what you want. But learning to make your own sewing patterns based on your measurements is truly a liberating experience. The Soft Work Garment Design course is here to help you do just that. The course is taught by Christy Johnson, who has been studying how clothes are made for over 20 years. While working as a fashion designer, she began to realize that modern clothes were not just overcomplicated in sewing, but also extremely wasteful. When she looked more closely at her favorite vintage pieces from around the world, she noticed a trend. They were all made from rectangles that easily locked into one another. This not only made them less wasteful, but they were also easier to sew. She took these skills and created a clothing design and pattern making framework that she's taught to hundreds of students, from beginners to advanced sewists. Software course is not about a specific skill or finished product. It's a way of making clothes using easy-to-learn skills that will set you up for knowing how to design, pattern, and customize garments using your own measurements, not some mythical inconsistent sizing. We know all about that, right? The pre-recorded format of the software course means you can take the course at your own pace, while the live Q&A sessions ensure that you have help when you hit roadblocks. Oh, and you have lifetime access to the course, so you can refer back to the materials at any time. Enrollment closes on September 22nd, so be sure to sign up by visiting softwarecourse.com. One thing I liked about working in the buying department at my first job was the rhythm of it all. It was so reliable, this consistent cycle of meetings and projects. Oh, it's the second Monday of the month. Okay, well, this week there's going to be open to buy, and then there'll be a fitting, and then there'll be like sketch review. And I don't know, it just always felt reassuring. Everyone had a timeline and we all stuck to it. And there were weekly meetings, monthly meetings, quarterly meetings. All of them were part of making decisions about product and then planning and perfecting the products we would deliver to stores. It was so seamless. And I'm going to tell you, at this stage in my career, I had a very good work-life balance. Like, there was time to get just about everything done. It was a great feeling. A feeling that I have not had in my career since then. My first buying job wasn't exactly fast fashion yet, but it was sort of proto-fast fashion. Regular brands and retailers like department stores or high fashion labels or even mall retailers like The Gap, they planned and delivered product by season. Spring, summer, that was like one delivery. Fall, winter, that was another delivery. And maybe they do some special smaller collections for holiday or resort. So that would be like at most 4, maybe 5 if they also really leaned hard into some sort of special back to school thing. But that was usually pretty unlikely because that would be covered by fall, winter, right? Just a few collections each year. Those collections would deliver at the beginning of a season and then live on the sales floor for months. And at the end of that season, there would be a sale to clear through the leftovers, and then new stuff would arrive. And in fact, this is also the era of when you could go to like a TJ Maxx or a Filene's Basement, a Nordstrom Rack, and get really good deals on past season's merchandise. Because what would happen is if like a store, especially a department store, had this stuff left at the end of the season, even after doing this clearance event, then they would ship it off to one of these off-price retailers. And so this stuff, there wasn't too much of it. You know what I mean? Like, it always ended up with someone somewhere. And generally, people were pretty happy with it. Now, this strategy also kind of dictated consumer behavior. For one, if you weren't feeling a brand's trend direction or color palette or general product assortment during a season, you were sort of out of luck. And if lots of customers didn't like it, well, then the brand was out of luck, experiencing lower sales and being forced to sell more stuff at a markdown to get rid of it, or clearing it out through a TJ Maxx kind of situation. And there would be times when you would go to one of those off-price kinds of stores and you'd be like, wow, it's like the entire Express threw up in here, right? Furthermore, as a customer, you didn't feel like you had to visit a store regularly in case you missed out on something, because there wasn't a lot of new stuff, right? Once a month or every few months would do just fine. The goal wasn't to get you to come into the store every week or every day. From an internal perspective, like in terms of the product development, dropping new product far less often meant that retailers had plenty of time to get fit materials and all of the other details just right. And they had more time to plan what those product stories would be in hopes of not being a flop, right? Of course, there would always be misses. I always tell everyone, all my clients, listen, there's always got to be a bestseller and there's always got to be a worst seller, because that's just how it works. But the goal was to mitigate how bad those worst sellers were. So if you had more time to plan and strategize, you might be more likely to run a pretty profitable business where you weren't selling a lot of stuff on sale to get rid of it. The timeline for producing product itself was so much slower that a retailer would probably start working on a delivery 9 months in advance, ideating, designing, sampling, writing orders, continuing to do fittings and wear tests until finally receiving the product, which was, of course, shipped the slow way on a boat across the ocean months later. And these brands were in the business of selling you the whole outfit. So building collections of interchangeable pieces that coordinated made it easy to get you to spend a little bit more money to build a wardrobe. And since there wasn't going to be a lot of new stuff delivering, if you bought a couple pieces and were really happy with them, you might come back and buy other pieces that complemented it. So it all fit together pretty well. Not that people weren't working really hard, but it was more manageable and it made sense. Now, my employer, once again, not exactly fast fashion, but practically there. My employer delivered new stuff every month. Was it a whole store of new stuff every month? No. But stores would receive shipments of merchandise 4 to 5 days each week with a mixture of restock and new items. Rather than marking down things at the end of the season like more traditional brands did, we usually did it after 10 weeks, ideally, right? That was the goal, to sell 10% of each order every week and ideally run out at the end of 10 weeks. Whatever was left was marked down, and we usually did one round of markdowns each month. Periodically, think Black Friday or maybe Memorial Day or Labor Day, we would do a couple of days of take an additional 50% off sale prices to clear out more, and we would end up with very little left. And, when I think about that time period, of course, every once in a while there would be something that was kind of a dud, but not that many duds. What we were more often doing is, like I said, just marking down those leftovers, those stragglers, maybe things that there were only a few left in a few stores. It wasn't usually entire programs of things that we were marking down or just taking an entire section of the store and converting it to markdown. Spoiler alert, that would change over time. There would be a lot more duds. There would be a lot more to mark down. But at that time, it really wasn't. And we spent so much time planning. We planned our product in themes called concepts that would last for 2 months at a time. And each 2-month period would have 3 concepts per department: women's, men's, and housewares. In fact, if you went into a store, and really most retail stores at this point, you would see each department laid out in these 3 concepts. The physical areas themselves would use subtle indicators like different paint colors or wallpapers, different signage to indicate that you were in a different zone. That's what they were called, zone of the store, with a different theme. And we would be okay, well, one of the zones has to be edgy, right? One of the zones has to be really feminine, and one of the zones has to be sort of boho, right? I mean, it would mix up. We'd be oh, this time we're going for a more unisex zone or what have you. But that was generally how it flowed. And those were our 3 big customer archetypes that we were pandering to. And so we would try to make sure they had a place in the store. Still, despite all these zones and planning for these 2-month windows of product, we planned the delivery of our new items in a way that ensured that new products were arriving in stores every week. Not a ton, but a few things, right? And store visual teams were expected to move things around the sales floor pretty frequently, kind of responding to sales or newness. The goal was to get customers to come into the store every week or 2, so making it seem new and exciting was a way to encourage that behavior. I will say that we were kind of legendary for high prices that did not align with the quality of what we were selling. Once again, I worked in the stores for a long time, and I saw wild damages and quality issues. Nothing would be coming in the fast fashion era, but we had these pants, these jeans that we called the ass blowout jeans because they would that's exactly what would happen, and the returns on them would be pretty egregious. The thing is, we were able to charge high prices that didn't really align with the quality of the product because customers didn't care. And we were marking up the product so much, far more than a lot of other retailers. But like I said, people were willing to pay for it. And this company had a lot of overhead because they spent a lot of money on branding. Every store had its own in-house visual team that built and created elaborate displays. Like, I'm not kidding. Every store had a wood shop in the back where they were building things. That stuff cost money. So, and there were other things that we did in the name of brand that cost a lot of money, right? We put on our own showcase at South by Southwest. We had a massive corporate staff that worked out of a stunning campus in Philadelphia's Navy Yard. And we were a publicly traded company, meaning our goal at the end of the day, despite all the money we were spending on branding, was to pay shareholders. So yeah, we had a lot of reasons to mark up the prices a lot higher than others. But you know what? For a long time, people had no problem paying them. And that was just because that branding that we were spending all that money on, it was that powerful. You know, we talk about that idea that I've felt lucky to be where I was, that in fashion, we're all so lucky to be here. This was one of those companies where the branding was so exceptional that you felt 100 times lucky to be there. And when you told people where you worked, they were dazzled, at least briefly. In general, we were working about 6 months in advance, meaning if it was September, we were working on next spring. And some categories like sweaters and cold weather accessories, they took even longer. So I would plan scarves and gloves 8 to 10 months in advance. Dyeing yarn, getting it right, it takes a long time. I was often managing about 5 categories at a time, and each category had at most 10 new styles delivering each month. So it was pretty manageable. If coming up with 40 to 50 new products every month sounds difficult, remember that new colors, for example, counted as a style, because that was another thing that was a key part of retail at that point, whether you were in the kind of like proto fast fashion retailer I was in, or anyone selling at the mall. And that was this idea of what we would call evergreen styles that we would carry for years on end, adding new colors here and there to get people to buy more of them, but nonetheless holding on to them until they stop selling, right? For example, if you bought a pair of skinny jeans and you liked them, odds were high that you could come back and buy the same pair in 3 months, 6 months, or even a year later. When it came to looking for new stuff, I would usually go to New York a couple times each month to meet with vendors and see what they were working on. And I often had Pantone swatches and mood boards to help guide my process. And over time, it kind of felt like a big and kind of fun logic problem to solve. But remember, I had time to get things right. Working 6 to 8 months in advance meant that there was plenty of time to make changes and perfect the product. We rarely had massive quality issues outside of just the fact that, we charged more for things than they were really worth from a quality perspective. And when we did have massive quality issues, it usually had something to do with a factory error, not a major misstep on our part. And it's really it's just interesting to think about how spending more time on this stuff allowed us to be more strategic and not have so many duds that we had to mark down, right? Because they didn't fit or people didn't like them or they weren't good quality. It was almost easy to run a successful business, at that time. I would say that my first buying job was fast fashion 0.75. Not quite full on fast fashion yet, but not exactly this slower, I wouldn't call it slow fashion at all, but this slower fashion that other retailers had, right? So like I said, my employer was making so much money. Business was just growing and growing. And now that shopping online was more normal, we could test out new ideas on the website and then expand them into stores when they succeeded. In fact, we loved buying for the website because we weren't locked in by how much different stuff could fit on a sales floor. We could actually be infinite in terms of what we offered because it didn't have to fit into a brick and mortar space and look good. So we weren't buying a ton of web exclusive stuff. This was the term that we were throwing around a lot then. But we were definitely expanding it more and more to get an idea of what we wanted to do in stores. And customers really loved this like web exclusive idea. Like they could only get it there. And so we even would like tag that on the website so people would know. I feel like I'm explaining how the internet works to you or something, but literally like we were figuring this stuff out at that time. It's all like standard to us now, right? But when I began my career, which wasn't like a million years ago, but periodically our website would just straight up go out for a weekend and we didn't make any online sales for like 2 days. It was like a regular thing. It's funny to think about that happening now because I know for that company, online business is probably bigger than stores. But back then it wasn't, right? It was just like this growing thing. And we were all like every other retailer trying to figure out how to do it. There were 2 brands out there that were giving us more than a little bit of anxiety. One was American Apparel and the other was Forever 21. Could they be more different, right? Now, American Apparel was selling stuff for about the same prices as we were, but everything was ostensibly, it's a little bit more complicated than that, of course, but it was ostensibly made in the USA, and it had a good story about workers' rights. We won't even go into what was happening behind the scenes there, but I am definitely thinking about doing an American Apparel exclusive episode at some point because it was complicated, right? Our company would have never been able to compete with American Apparel in a real way because, one, we were legendary for stealing from artists. There was a website out there. If I told you the name of it, you would very easily figure out the name of where I worked. But let's just say adding counterfeit to the name of my employer was really easy. And that was really bad PR. And there were constant other controversies over things we had bought in the past. A gun-shaped Christmas ornament, a very, just so disgusting, so reprehensible. I don't know who let this into the stores or thought it was a good idea. This game called Ghettopoly. It was so messed up. So many more things, but those were some of them, right? Some of the controversies. That wasn't a great PR look. So American Apparel, despite being, like creepy sex pest world headquarters, people didn't know that yet. And so we looked really bad in comparison. On top of that, you could never make the kind of profits our shareholders expected while also manufacturing in the US and charging the same price as we were. It just wasn't going to work. In fact, American Apparel actually wasn't like very profitable and ultimately went out of business because it wasn't exactly working for them either. It definitely wasn't going to work for us. Our supply chain was deeply ingrained in making everything overseas. That didn't stop, of course, our company. After all, easily could fit the word counterfeit into the company name. It didn't stop our company from trying to make stores look more like American Apparel. That kind of failed. And it didn't stop them from trying to create their own copies of American Apparel tees and hoodies, which were unfortunately more successful than you might expect. And I guess a lot of customers didn't really care about the ethical side of American Apparel. I think they cared more about the aesthetic or the cool factor. Forever 21 was another story. Also, how do you compete with Forever 21, right? And it was just one of these new retailers that were growing and growing. Like it was starting to like concern us a little bit. There was also Zara, H&M, a few others, but Forever 21, Zara, and H&M were the big ones. These stores took everything we did, but they turned it up like 5 notches. Stores received new styles every week, sometimes every day, and everything was less expensive than other brands. Like you could not compete with the pricing. We couldn't. We would have been basically selling everything we made at cost, the cost we paid for it. It was wild. Furthermore, FOMO was a big part of the business model. If you didn't visit regularly and buy something as soon as you saw it, it probably wouldn't be there the next time you went in, and you would never find it again because they weren't in the evergreen business. It was all about newness. And when you went into these stores, rather than seeing 2 to 3 trend concepts, think like, aesthetic themes once again, rather than seeing 2 or 3 of those playing out like you would in our store or most mall stores, you would find half a dozen or more. Even just one rail would be its own product story. It kind of felt like there was something for everyone there, or almost everyone, because the fit was tiny and not good for a long time. Now, some of these brands, believe it or not, I think of them as brands that really, popped up in this century, but some of them had actually been around since the 80s. And while they'd had steady growth during their first years, and particularly in the 90s, they were picking up momentum in the new century because they had found a massive source of new customers with maybe not a lot of money to spend, but money to spend. And that was millennials. The millennials were the first big generation since the boomers. Sorry, Generation X. And they were known for being disruptors. How many times have you heard millennial and disruptor, or millennials killed, millennials ruined? How many times have you heard that together? It's like a trope at this point, right? One thing when it came to clothes and shopping is that millennials didn't really care about the things that previous generations had preferred. In fact, I'm saying it in relation to clothing and shopping, but really it was like restaurants, where they lived, furniture, cars, you name it. When it came to shopping, millennials cared less about brands, except for how they also cared a lot about certain brands. It was very interesting. But they also had less money to spend, right? For like a gazillion different reasons. Many of you know these very well. Anyway, I know you've all been wondering, who coined the term fast fashion? Well, I don't know who I thought it would be. Here's who I didn't think it would be: the New York Times. But in fact, the New York Times is responsible, as the legend goes. I found the article for coining the term fast fashion in a 1989 article. Get ready for this. They're comparing two brands. One of them I'd completely forgotten about. They compared Zara, okay, article about fast fashion, makes sense, with Express. They were both of these brands were focused on offering regular newness in their stores. And this is the first time fast fashion is like written in stone or written in probably in a real paper newspaper, right? From the article, every week there's a new shipment from Spain, said Juan Lopez, who came to New York in February to head Zara's United States operation. The stock in the store changes every 3 weeks. The latest trend is what we're after. It takes 15 days between a new idea and getting it into the stores. And that, my friends, is what motivated the writer Anne Marie Schiro in December of 1989 to refer to these two retailers, especially Zara, as fast fashion. The article itself is called Two New Stores That Cruise Fashion's Fast Lane, and I'll share that with you in the show notes. Once again, I kind of low-key had forgotten about Express, and so it was really interesting to read about them. So Zara at that time is no different than it is now, really. Zara was really focusing on selling items to customers rather than outfits, right? But remember, every other retailer was really like, okay, we're going to create these interchangeable sort of wardrobe building blocks. So maybe people will buy more things when they come in to see it. And then since we're not going to deliver a lot of new stuff over the next few months, they'll have a reason to come back and maybe add on to that wardrobe that they started building this season, right? Express, I still can't believe we're talking about Express right now. Express was more focused on a collection approach like the rest of the retailers. They were sticking with the idea that stores should sell interchangeable pieces that can build outfits. But Zara was like, it's a one-off, right? So Express, also once again being called fast fashion in 1989, the way they were speeding up their process of offering newness, which is still wildly slower than where we are right now. They didn't have designers, which is wild to me because I know a friend who was a designer there later. And instead, they had buyers traveling 4 to 5 times a year to pick up inspiration, which, listen, if you need me to translate this for you, because I did this many times in my buying career, going on these inspiration trips, guess what we were doing? We were buying garments from other designers and brands that our factories could copy, right? We did this, yes, in apparel, but we did it in accessories, shoes, all of it. Like, how can we make a version of this for our customer, but not get into legal trouble, right? So Express was actually doing this in the 80s. Kind of wild. I will tell you, for those of you who may have forgotten or are too young to know, that Express really kind of did rule the 1990s, opening more and more and bigger stores all over the place, and offering like I don't know, kind of like really good quality and pretty like trendy product. Not like to the level of where we are right now, but they maintained their cool factor through that decade, and then just kind of dried up as we got into the century. They couldn't keep up anymore. Zara, interestingly enough, through the 90s remained a bit niche here in the United States because it was limited only to stores in a few major cities, while Express is like in every mall and opening stores just like in cities. So then, I'm like, okay, well, so it seems like New York Times here coining the term fast fashion, they must be all up in it for a long time. I read a 1998 New York Times article, made me laugh so hard, referring to just a little Swedish outlet chain called H&M. They didn't even use H&M in the headline. And I was like, if this isn't about H&M, who could it be? But it was. At the time, this little Swedish company was making a mere 250 million garments per year. To be fair, now they churn out about 3 billion garments each year, which is many, many more. But the New York Times, like H&M hadn't arrived here in the United States yet, but it was expanding into France. And the New York Times was like, I don't know if this will work, because French Cosmopolitan had recently sneered about H&M. At H&M, they don't copy, they imitate, and they make no secret of it. The New York Times wondered if this little Swedish company that was known for copying fashion was going to make it, especially since it was selling clothes on the bargain street in Paris rather than alongside the fancy brands. This makes me laugh so much because 10 years later, this idea of high street shopping, which would be the high street being full of fast fashion brands, was the norm, right? That was like where everyone went shopping. You would never question someone moving into the high street and being successful. You would just be like, wow, can they afford the rent, right? By 2000, the New York Times was changing its tune when it came to this, little upstart Swedish brand called H&M, and really this idea of low price fashion as a whole. In 2000, H&M arrived in New York City, and I will tell you, I went on a trip from Chicago to New York that year, and 2 things really stick in my memory. No, okay, let's say 3. 1, I had muesli at the hotel, and it was so good. I still think about that muesli, and I've been a lifelong muesli convert since then. 2, I'm realizing now 2 of my 3 memories are about food. I'm sorry. 2 is that there was a Krispy Kreme in Penn Station, and I'd never had it before, and it blew my mind. And 3 is that I went to H&M, and I was like, okay, I've never been in a 3-story shop that wasn't a department store. It wasn't cheap, but it was very affordable, and everything was awesome. I remember buying a bunch of Peter Pan collar shirts, love those, a red trench coat that made me feel really cool, and some other accessories. And when I took them back to Chicago and wore them, people were like, oh my God, where did you get this incredible fashion? It made me feel so cool. Would I feel that way if I went to H&M now? No. But I will tell you that halo of that experience carried on for me with H&M for quite a while. And when I was living in Philadelphia, working as a buyer, and I would go to New York to visit vendors, there was one H&M that was in Midtown. It was weird. There were 2 a block apart, but one was very superior to the other. I always went in there and I was like, wow, they have all the cool stuff. And it's not cheap. It's not like Forever 21 prices, but it's not as expensive as the place I work at all. And it's cool. And I remember they jumped on rompers before anyone else. And I had a few really awesome rompers from there. Anyway, H&M, it changed, right? I mean, it's interesting. We're going to talk more about the evolution or de-evolution of fast fashion. You can decide. But H&M is one of those ones where somewhere along the line, it lost its luster in a big way. And I can't help but think that it's because every other retailer adopted their model and was kind of doing it better. Okay, but H&M, it's 2000. It's arriving in New York. The New York Times is like, maybe like this little Swedish company is like, okay. The New York Times article said, H&M arrives at a time when consumer shopping patterns have changed markedly in the United States. Ever on the prowl for bargains and made cynical by frequent store markdowns and promotions, even many affluent customers have deserted department stores. They shop instead at discounters like Target and outlet centers like Woodbury Common in Central Valley, New York. It's chic to pay less, said Howard L. Davidovitz, a New York retail analyst. More now than it has ever been. And I will tell you, my friends, this is where we begin to hear rumblings that the department stores are going to go out of business. Yeah, it started in like 2000. It's interesting to think about that, right? Because we talked a long time ago about department stores and how they came to be and how they really revolutionized retail. It was an episode I did, was it like 2 years ago now, with Jenny of Late to the Party. And malls were built with these huge anchor locations for department stores because that was the lure to bring customers into the mall. But in the 80s, as more like specialty retail, think like the Gap, the Limited, Express, became more appealing to customers, more and more people were going to the mall to go to those stores. And the department stores, they were starting to fall off a little bit, but what they had going for them is they carried like brands, right? And higher end makeup and nice shoes, and they were consistent. They offered that customer service. It was different than the specialty stores within the mall. But when we get into this century, the department stores are even less appealing to people, right? Because you're starting to see that these specialty retailers are brands in their own way that are just as powerful as like the brands you would find at the department store, right? And on top of that, then you have these other retailers coming in like H&M, like Forever 21, that are offering more variety, and they don't even need to offer a brand. This is making it really difficult for department stores. Now, interestingly, we never talk about this anymore, but like there was like a 10-year period where all anybody wanted to do, I would say around 2010 and on, is talk about the retail apocalypse and how e-commerce, shopping online, was killing every retailer, especially department stores, but everyone. And we kind of stopped talking about that. I mean, malls have died. Malls are closing. What it is to be a mall has changed. But there are also really successful malls. And furthermore, data has proven that, in the beginning of the pandemic, everybody said we would never shop at a store ever again, that we'd be over it. But actually, people are stoked to be shopping IRL again, and that there's a huge pickup there, while shopping online has been in a bit of a decline. So I don't know if the department stores will ever come back, but this year, 2000, is becoming the turning point for a lot of these department stores because there are these new brands popping up, because people are seeing a massive expansion of all these off-price retailers like TJ Maxx, right? That Target is just opening more and more and more stores and becoming a brand in its own right, and offering fashion, like trendy clothes, in a variety of sizes for the whole family at good prices. There is competition coming from every direction for every retailer, but especially for department stores. So back to this 2000 piece in the New York Times, lauding the arrival of H&M and seeing this change in how people shop. The writer, Ruth LaFurla, she wanted to say that many other brands that focused on low prices and newness were seeing a lot of success. One of those was Old Navy. This is where we see Old Navy really exploding, and over the next 10 years, becoming the brand that really keeps Gap going, right? Gap was like the fancier version, practically a heritage brand at that point. This is where we see Old Navy begin its big growth upward and eclipsing Gap, and Gap sort of starting to lose their way and never really finding finding their way back. It's sad. I think about Gap sometimes and I'm like, they could have, if they had just changed what they were doing in the late 90s and the first 10 years of this century, they could be like a heritage style brand like a Levi's, where you could just go for like consistently nice and good fitting jeans and basics, right? But they decided to try to go fashion instead. Maybe someday they can get it back. But so yeah, Old Navy is taking off, all these off-price retailers. H&M, of course, is here and people are getting excited. And the writer Ruth Laferla, she notes that despite a strong economy overall, young people, aka the millennials and the zennials, were less interested in the longevity of their clothing and instead wanted constant newness each season. These retailers were delivering that. It's also funny in this article, there's like quaint little note from the CEO of Lerner, which is New York & Company, saying that he doesn't think these new brands will have an impact on the mall brands. Yeah, that one aged really well, right? Let's take a moment to thank some of the incredible small businesses who keep Clotheshorse going via their generous Patreon support. Selena Sanders, a social impact brand that specializes in upcycle clothing using only reclaimed vintage or thrifted materials from tea towels, linens, blankets, and quilts. Sustainably crafted in Los Angeles, each piece is designed to last in one's closet for generations to come. Maximum style, minimal carbon footprint. Shift Clothing out of beautiful Astoria, Oregon, with a focus on natural fibers, simple hardworking designs, and putting fat people first. Discover more at shiftwheeler.com. Late to the Party, creating one-of-a-kind statement clothing from vintage, salvaged, and thrifted textiles. They hope to tap into the dreamy memories we all hold. Floral curtains, a childhood dress, the wallpaper in your best friend's rec room. All while creating modern, sustainable garments that you'll love wearing and have for years to come. Late to the Party is passionate about celebrating and preserving textiles, the memories they hold, and the stories they have yet to tell. Check them out on Instagram at Late to the Party People. Vino Vintage, based just outside of LA. We love the hunt of shopping secondhand because you never know what you might find. Catch us at flea markets around Southern California by following us on Instagram at vino.vintage so you don't miss our next event. Gabriella Antonis is a visual artist, an upcycler, and a fashion designer. But Gabriella Antonis is also a feminist micro-business with radical ideals. She's the one-woman band trying to help you understand why slow fashion is what the world needs. If you find yourself in New Orleans, Louisiana, you may buy her ready-to-wear upcycle garments in person at the store Slow Down at 2855 Magazine Street. Slow Down NOLA only sells vintage and slow fashion from local designers, and Gabriella's garments are guaranteed to be in stock in person, but they also have a website so you may support this woman-owned and run business from wherever you are. If you're interested in Gabriella making a one-of-a-kind garment for you, DM her on Instagram at SlowFashionGabriella to book a consultation. Please follow her on Instagram at SlowFashionGabriella. That's Gabriella with one L. Dylan Page is an online clothing and lifestyle brand based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our products are chosen with intention for the conscious community. Everything we carry is animal-friendly, ethically made, sustainably sourced, and cruelty-free. Dylan Page is for those who never stop questioning where something comes from. We know that personal experience dictates what's sustainable for you, and we are here to help guide and support you to make choices that fit your needs. Check us out at dylanpage.com and find us on Instagram at dylanpagelife&style. Salt Hats, purveyors of truly sustainable hats, hand-blocked, sewn, and embellished in Detroit, Michigan. Find us on Instagram at Salt Hats. Gentle Vibes Vintage. We are purveyors of polyester and psychedelic relics. We encourage experimentation and play not only in your wardrobe, but in your home too. We have thousands of killer vintage pieces ready for their next adventure. See them all on Instagram at Gentle Vibes Vintage. Thumbprint is Detroit's only fair trade marketplace located in the historic Eastern Market. Our small business specializes in products handmade by empowered women in South Africa, making a living wage creating things they love like hand-painted candles and ceramics. We also carry a curated assortment of sustainable and natural locally made goods. Thumbprint is a great gift destination for both the special people in your life and for yourself. Browse our online store at thumbprintdetroit.com and find us on Instagram at thumbprintdetroit. High Energy Vintage is a fun and funky vintage shop located in Somerville, Massachusetts, just a few minutes away from downtown Boston. They offer a highly curated selection of bright and colorful clothing and accessories from the 1940s to the 1990s for people of all genders. Husband and wife duo Wiley and Jessamy handpick each piece for quality and style, with a focus on pieces that transcend trends and will find a home in your closet for many years to come. In addition to clothing, the shop also features a large selection of vintage vinyl and old school video games. Find them on Instagram at High Energy Vintage, online at highenergyvintage.com, and at markets in and around Boston. Vagabond Vintage DTLV is a vintage clothing, accessories, and decor reselling business based in downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. Not only do we sell in Las Vegas, but we're also located throughout resale markets in San Francisco, as well as at a curated boutique called Lux and Ivy, located in Indianapolis, Indiana. Jessica, the founder and owner of Vagabond Vintage DTLV, recently opened the first IRL location located in the Arts District of downtown Las Vegas on August 5th. The shop has a strong emphasis on 60s and 70s garments, single-stitch tees, and dreamy loungewear. Follow them on Instagram at Vagabond Vintage DTLV and keep an eye out for their website coming fall of 2022. So the other thing that's happening very soon after this article is written, really like a year later, is September 11th, 2001, right? Which starts its own sort of mini recession here in the United States. At the same time, in like 1999, 2000, 2001, we're seeing the first tech bubble burst. So a lot of people are losing jobs then. September 11th comes, and it kind of shuts down the economy for a while. In fact, we're told if we want to be good Americans, we have to get out there and shop. But people are already starting to struggle even more financially than they had in the previous decade. And then we've got all these millennials and zennials being like, oh, I guess I'll never be as financially stable and successful as my parents because this is how the world is now, right? So it's just a really different time. It's the perfect time for these lower priced retailers to really take off. Now then there's Forever 21. Okay, so Forever 21 was a slightly different beast than Zara and H&M, and I will maintain that forever. Very different store concept and very different, I don't know, like pricing and sort of energy around it. All three offered constant newness and low prices, but Forever 21's prices were even lower. We're talking tank tops that are $1.90, necklaces that are $2.90. And here's the thing, at Forever 21, nothing ever went on sale because it didn't have to. It sold at its full low price. Now that is a gamble to take, right? To assume that everything will sell at full price, and it did there for a long time. Forever 21 was around for quite a while before I started seeing a sales section there, and I knew that they were going to go bankrupt when I started seeing them sending out emails and big banners on their websites announcing big clearance events. I was like, oh, this is not what Forever 21 has been. And their entire pricing and product assortment is built upon only selling stuff at full price. That's how it remains profitable for them, because the prices are so low in the first place. Put a pin in that because we're going to come back to that. Forever 21 began in 1984 as a single store in Highland Park, which is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. It was called Fashion 21. And when I lived in LA, it was still there, and it still had the Fashion 21 sign. And it was right by where I went to bar class every day. And I would totally go in there and look sometimes. It was really small. It reminded me of like mall stores of my childhood because it had like the grid and everything. It didn't look like how Forever 21 stores looked at that point or how retail looks right now, right? So in the beginning, when it was Fashion 21, it primarily sold closeout clothing, meaning like just whatever manufacturers were trying to get rid of. But over time, it grew pretty fast, opening a new store every 6 months, usually in malls, in its first decade in business. By 2005, it was becoming such a force to be reckoned with that it bought the chain Gadzooks, RIP, turned them all into Forever 21 stores, doubling its number of stores to 400. For some context there, the company that I worked for, the Fast Fashion 0.75, we had about 100, maybe 120 stores when I started working there. 400 is a lot of stores. At this point in 2005, when they bought Gadzooks and got to 400, they had more stores than we had, which meant they had more buying power, which meant that they could reduce prices even more. And you know what? This is a good moment to call out something that I think gave Forever 21 a massive leg up over the other early fast fashion brands: the mall location. Being in the mall, you can't underscore, because in 2005, the mall is still a place you go because shopping online is still kind of weird. And all of these Forever 21 stores, at least by mall standards, were huge. At about 25,000 square feet, that's a huge store. And unlike its mall competitors, most Forever 21 stores carried clothing for women, men, and children, while other mall stores were usually very specific, only catering to one of those customers. Zara and H&M were not in malls at this point, focusing only on big city stores. So Forever 21 is out there kind of just taking over the malls. And eventually Forever 21 would begin branching into enormous spaces outside malls. Specifically, I remember they opened a 40,000 square foot flagship store in Pasadena, California. They opened that in 2006. I want to say that I went there probably that same year. I actually was going to Disneyland. That was that trip. I went to that store. It was in an old, I want to say, Saks Fifth Avenue department store building. So it was huge. And I just was like, I can't believe this is all of Forever 21. And it was really well merchandised. It was full of anything ever you would ever want to buy. And it looked and felt good. After they opened that big store, it was kind of like, okay, now we're going to try to make every store even bigger. So they started to sort of change the way that malls looked, because they would expand to multi-story stores in malls, which the only stores in most malls that had multiple floors were department stores. So this is a big thing. And then they were like also eating up their neighbors' spaces too. So just gradually growing and growing and growing, taking up more and more of the mall, which we'll talk about this more next week, really was scary for the malls themselves. As Forever 21 is going bankrupt, like what's going to happen with these enormous spaces that are smack in the center of the mall? What do you do with those? Over time, Forever 21 was just like eating up more and more of every mall, that they started moving into abandoned department store spaces. Like around 2010, we see this happening a lot as department stores are finally closing and just failing. I think Sears was first, because they can't keep up with what shopping and retail had become. Okay, so here we have the original fast fashion brands, the fast fashion 1.0. We have Forever 21, Zara, H&M, Mango. Overseas, we have Topshop. They are redefining how everything will be sold to us for the rest of time, or at least until today, right? Their focus was constant newness at affordable prices. In the past, affordable prices had meant sacrificing trend or style. You might have to buy something that was from the previous season, or was from Kmart, or, just wasn't cool if you wanted low prices. Now you could get all of that, and that was a really big deal. Forever 21 and Zara and H&M, they had a catch though, right? Like The steady flow of new products at the lowest prices meant that customers had to make a trade-off. Basically, they could have those things for sure. They could have all the new trendy stuff they wanted for a very low price, but that meant sacrificing quality and fit. There was just no way to execute it all. These clothes were essentially quasi-disposable because they often didn't hold up for very many wears. They might not even be able to survive even one wash cycle. That didn't mean they were going to live in the landfill for centuries, right? But in terms of being a garment that you could wear for a long time, it just wasn't there. The fit was inconsistent and not great. I mean, I've had horrible fitting things from all of them. But it worked, right? Like, you didn't care if you were disappointed, I guess. Customers, and myself included at that time, we preferred low prices and trendiness. And these brands, they were trading in volume. Get a customer to come in shopping every week, sell them a few items every time, and suddenly you could run $1 billion business off of selling very inexpensive clothing. And if the customer is kind of like, yeah, the quality sucks, the fit sucks, it doesn't last very long, you know what's great about that? If they're not mad about it and they keep coming back, they're going to buy even more stuff to replace that other stuff. So in a weird way, by selling them subpar product, you drive even more sales. You get even more money out of each customer. It's wild, I know. This is never advice that I would give any small business, just FYI. It's wild that this has gone on for as long as it has gone on. It shocks me every day. Furthermore, the original fast fashion brands gave millennials something they had never had before: personal choice. Now that they were moving into adulthood, not only did they have the personal freedom to wear what they wanted, they also had the option of many more choices. And if they didn't like what they were being offered this week, that was okay because there would be new stuff next week. It was like an endless buffet of clothing where there was always something you needed and wanted. This is revelatory when you are in that phase of life where you are constantly trying out new things as you figure out who you are and what you like. Clothing is obviously a huge part of that. You know, I often say, and I believe this, that millennials are the fast fashion generation. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. That doesn't mean we're all monsters out there who don't care about anything. But this recipe for selling us clothing emerged at a time when we were just in our early adulthood or late teens, and we wanted to try new things. We wanted to wear a lot of clothes. We wanted to feel good. And they happened to sell it to us at a low price. And as we got more into adulthood, where it got more real, right? This is what we could afford because, you know, there were student loans and rising rents and stagnating wages and all the things that we know to be part of our adult lives that have really held us back. It's like everything happened at the right time. Fast fashion began to emerge on the scene, this new business model that people, seriously, they did not think it would work, okay? It worked because millennials were here and ready to try it and didn't care about brands and department stores and all the things our parents had cared about. It worked because it emerged on the scene during a really bad, what are we, 23 years into the century, a really bad pair of decades financially that don't seem to be getting better, right? And because they also, maybe not at first, but a few years in, were able to leverage social media to make even more customers comfortable with shopping from them and get them used to that idea of a new outfit for every photo, for every event, and therefore get them used to shopping all the time. All of these factors made fast fashion blow up. It made millennials the fast fashion generation, even though, to be honest, generations before us are all buying fast fashion too, right? They all got on the horse alongside us. I guess they sat behind us. I'm not really sure how the seating is on this horse, but they've been there with us. But millennials and zennials, they kind of got it going, right? The thing is, like, fast fashion is like really picking up momentum. Here we are, like by 2005, 2006, 2007. despite the economy being already a little iffy. The other non-fast fashion retailers turned up their noses at this. They were like, these brands are gross. We will not compete with them. We do not consider them competitors. They are below us. These brands were cheap. They lacked brand cachet. They had terrible store merchandising, Surely customers would eventually walk away from the racks of low-quality polyester clothing, or maybe they would age out of it or something. But they didn't. They didn't, right? You know that. There's so much more that's going to come after this. You know that they didn't. And that realization that everyone was like, oh, this will go away. People will get sick of it. It's the thing when we talk about Shein or Temu or all of the Shein copies that are out there now. When I read things that are like, oh, people are going to get over it. It's not going to be popular in a few years. Shein's going to go away. So is that entire model. I'm not so sure about it, because that's the thing. All of these other retailers, some who had been around for a really long time, remember New York and Company being like, these H&M, NBD, guess what? They underestimated all of them. And what really happened is these original fast fashion brands turned everybody into fast fashion in just a few years. So initially, my employer looked down on Forever 21 as trashy. Like, you couldn't even bring it up in a meeting. And I remember going to a showroom with my boss, a shoe vendor, to look at some samples he developed for us. And we saw some shoes we had developed with Forever 21 tags on it. And she lost her shit, because she was just like, we can't be in Forever 21 too. Like, now you either have to cancel this order, cancel that order, give us money, what have you. It was explosive. Like, the worst thing that could happen to us, even though we shared a lot of vendors with Forever 21, meaning all the stuff was being made in the same factories, right? We could not be associated with Forever 21. Never mind that I personally was shopping there pretty regularly because my job required constant trendy new clothes. I had to have a look every day, but it didn't pay me enough to buy them from our brand, even with the employee discount. And I had to say, honestly, as someone whose job was literally to predict what customers would want before they wanted it, Forever 21 was doing that really, really well. See, Forever 21 specifically didn't care about selling you basics, although H&M still tried to. It wasn't really stealing looks from the runway like Zara either. It was just offering a lot of new stuff in many different aesthetics. So there was something for just about everyone. I mean, granted that if you could fit into the sizes there, right? That was the cutoff there. But in general, from an aesthetic perspective, they covered them all. The retail industry, I don't know if do you remember last week I was talking about how in 2021, every investor out there was like, who's going to be the next Shein and how do I get on it, right? Well, back then, around 2005, 2006, the investors, the retail industry as a whole is like, there's a lot of potential here. How do we get in on this, right? Because we see other fast fashion brands growing at this point. Charlotte Russe, Wet Seal, Papaya, many more that have come and gone, some that were more regional. People see the potential here. At the same time, they wondered, is this something that could be a flash in the pan? It is a little like maybe people are going to get over this, right? They're going to get sick of the quality or too many clothes or what have you. Maybe it was something that was only for young people, because at this point, it's so funny to me. Actually, I laugh now. It kind of makes me feel old, but we talk all the time like, oh, Gen Z, they love Shein. Well, guess what? People of all ages shop from Shein. Back in this era, in the early aughts, we're like, oh, like fast fashion, like Forever 21, Zara, H&M. Oh, that's millennials shop there. It's for young people. It's the same narrative, right? Which is another reason I'm very concerned about what comes next after Shein. Because if you told me back in 2005, 2006, that Forever 21 was going to look like a dinosaur in about 10 years, 15 years, and there would be something even faster and more nefarious, I would have been like, wait a minute, what? Are you from the future? But then I also would have been like, I think you just made my brain explode. So at this time, though, back in 2005, 2006, going into 2007, it's like, is this the way we're going to buy clothes in the future, or is this just like a temporary thing? And maybe I think the belief is there will be these less expensive brands that are targeting young people and lower income people, but then all the other retailers will keep doing what they're doing and keep catering to their niche, and everyone will be happy and make lots of money still, right? Well, 2008 happened, meaning the financial crisis and the subsequent recession, and fashion changed forever. I was working at my first buying job when the recession hit. It hit hard and it lasted for a long time. And there was so much yelling in the office for like 2 years. After years of being able to take a really high markup and customers literally not care, be willing to pay any price we asked for what we sold, that came to a screeching halt. And so, like everyone else out there, except for Forever 21 and H&M and Zara, we had to put a lot of stuff on sale, and then on a deeper sale, and then go even deeper. We canceled some orders, but mostly we just squeezed vendors on pricing more than ever. In fact, executives concocted a plan to make the same amount of profit in terms of dollars while doing less in sales. How do you do that? You bring down expenses, right? So first, this is like one of the worst days of my career, honestly, which is funny because I've had some really bad days at work. We were forced to ask every vendor for a 10% discount on the orders we had already written, in addition to any future orders. How it went down is all of us were called into the center of the top floor of our building, and our GM, who was a total dick, I'll just say that, and he went on to totally drive a J. Crew into bankruptcy a few years later. He was a yeller. He's the one who threw a rolling rack at me. He told us all that we were going to go back to our desks and we were going to call every vendor that we had an order with and tell them this. And if he heard any of us not on the phone, we would be fired. So one, I hate talking on the phone. I'm just going to tell you, it's cool to talk on the phone with a friend or a family member, but calling someone I don't know very well on the phone gives me so much anxiety, and talking to a vendor on the phone is even more stressful because I really like to get everything in writing. So the fact that I was going to have to just call all these numbers all day was physically painful to me. So I decided I would just get it over fast. And I did call everyone. Now, what we had been told to say was, listen, we could cancel this order on you, but what we're going to do instead is give you the opportunity to give us a 10% discount and we'll keep it. So I could have said that to them, but that sounded really sketchy. So what I said was hey, listen, so here's what's going on. We're being told to do this. We have no choice. It's non-negotiable. I don't like it either, and I'm really sorry, and I hope we can figure out how to make this up to you in the future. And everybody was like, okay, here's your 10% discount. And it still felt terrible. One person cried. They were like, oh, I have to pay for my daughter's wedding. I'm a little stressed, but we got to do what we got to do. And I got done by noon, and he came over and was ready to yell at me. And I was like, oh, I'm done. Here you go. They're already revised. Here's the printouts. And he was like, oh, and then he yelled about something else. I don't even know. Anyway, that's one thing we did. Now, I want to be clear to you. When we took that 10% discount on these things that already were being made and shipped, what we did is we took money away from the vendors, from the factories, and from the people working in the factories. And I knew that as it was happening, but I was also like, I'm lucky to be here. If I don't have this job, I don't have anywhere to live. It sucked. It sucked. So powerless. The number of times I have felt so powerless while working within this industry, it's terrible. Okay, so that was one way we were able to make up the profit while selling less stuff, right? The other was that our budgets were cut. So less travel, fine. Office supplies, we had to start bringing our own. Our benefits, like our health insurance, became more expensive and covered less. But most importantly, or most worstly, I guess, a freeze was put in place for raises and promotions for 2 years. And everybody who worked in that company at that time saw that that was ultimately a setback for our careers. I can look back and be like, oh my God, I would have been a CEO somewhere 5 years ago if that hadn't happened, Wouldn't you know it, all those sacrifices, the company achieved a record level of profit that year, despite selling so much on sale. So executives got fat bonuses, shareholders got dividends. We didn't get anything, right? But just like, hey, thanks for pulling that off. That was about it. They canceled our Christmas party that year too, I think. But the recession didn't end fast. In fact, its effects continued for years. And I'm not sure any of us, those of you who are listening, I don't think we ever fully recovered. Sure, people got jobs again, but they paid less. Lots of us got sucked into the gig economy or permanent freelancing. God, my friend Marie was like on contract as a freelancer at VH1 for like 6 years. I was like, you have worked there 3 times longer than some of my jobs. Why aren't you a full-time employee? This is wild. At the same time, rent and healthcare got more expensive. Millennials graduated into a terrible job market with record levels of student loan debt. Most of us were barely getting by. So more and more people opted into fast fashion. In fact, as regular retailers struggled, Forever 21 and Zara and H&M, they were opening up more and more stores, reaching more and more customers, stealing them away from everyone else. Ultimately, the rest of the retail industry had no choice but to adopt the fast fashion model too, selling as much stuff as possible, as often as possible, and delivering new stuff as often as possible too. First, everyone raced their way to the bottom with endless sales and permanent promos. Places like My First Employer and Anthropologie and Free People and Madewell and J. Crew, big brands with higher prices, they took a sneakier path to the bottom. They knew that putting prices like $190 or even $19.90 or even $29.90 would ruin the image of their brands as being more premium, as superior to the other fast fashion brands. That's where they'd been living, right? But they also knew that customers couldn't really afford those higher prices. So what was the brilliant workaround? Keep the higher prices on the tags, but plan to sell most of the inventory on sale. And if you planned that in advance, you could architect the item to sell on sale and be just as profitable as a full price item had been in the past. Let's say that in 2007, pre-recession, a brand had been selling dresses for $68 with no problem. This meant that they could pay up to about $17 for each of these dresses and still be pretty profitable. But now, realistically, most of those dresses would sell for $29. That's what people were willing to pay. How do you stay profitable at that level? Well, you can't buy $17 dresses anymore. You have to buy dresses that cost $7 to $8 to make and put that $68 price tag on them. Then sell them at 50 to 60% off. So yeah, the $68 dress is a different garment than what it was in 2007. In fact, when we talk about that serious drop-off in quality in these mass mall brands, this is what caused it. There is a major difference in quality in mass market brand stuff made before 2008 and after. It's confusing though, right? Because the price looks the same. The store looks the same. You get it on sale and you feel like you got a great deal, but you really didn't. If you're enjoying this episode, then this is a great time to remind you that my work here at Clotheshorse is made possible by the support of listeners like you, just like NPR, and these great small businesses. Please go give them your support. Blank Cass, or Blanket Coats by Cass, is focused on restoring, renewing, and reviving the history held within vintage and heirloom textiles. By embodying the love, craft, and energy that is original to each vintage textile as I transfer it into a new garment, I hope we can reteach ourselves to care for and mend what we have and make it last. Blank Cass lives on Instagram at @blank_Cass, and a website will be launched soon at blankcass.com. Located in Whistler, Canada, Velvet Underground is a velvet jungle full of vintage and secondhand clothing, plants, a vegan cafe, and lots of rad products from other small sustainable businesses. Our mission is to create a brand and community dedicated to promoting self-expression, as well as educating and inspiring a more sustainable and conscious lifestyle, both for the people and the planet. Find us on Instagram at shop_velvetunderground or online at www.shopvelvetunderground.com. St. Evens is a New York City-based vintage shop that is dedicated to bringing you those special pieces you'll reach for again and again. More than just a store, St. Evens is dedicated to sharing the stories and history behind the garments. 10% of all sales are donated to a different charitable organization each month. New vintage is released every Thursday at wearstevens.com with previews of new pieces and more, brought to you on Instagram at wear_st.evens. That's Wear St. Evens. Country Feedback is a mom and pop record shop in Tarboro, North Carolina. They specialize in used rock, country, and soul and offer affordable vintage clothing and housewares. Do you have used records you want to sell? Country Feedback wants to buy them. Find us on Instagram at Country Feedback Vintage and Vinyl, or head down east and visit our brick and mortar. All are welcome at this inclusive and family-friendly record shop in the country. Republica Unicornia Yarns. Handmade yarn and notions for the color obsessed. Made with love and some swearing in fabulous Atlanta, Georgia by head yarn wench Kathleen. Get ready for rainbows with a side of giving a damn. Republica Unicornia is all about making your own magic using small batch, responsibly sourced, hand-dyed yarns and thoughtfully made notions. Slow fashion all the way down and discover the joy of creating your very own beautiful hand-knit, crocheted, or woven pieces. Find us on Instagram at Republica_Unicornia_yarns and at www.republicaunicornia.com. Picnic Wear, a slow fashion brand ethically made by hand from vintage and dead stock materials, most notably vintage towels. Founder Danny has worked in the industry as a fashion designer for over 10 years, but started Picnic Wear in response to her dissatisfaction with the industry's shortcomings. Picnic Wear recently moved to rural North Carolina, where all their sewing and accessories are now designed and cut, but the majority of their sewing is done by skilled garment workers in New York City. Their customers take comfort in knowing that all their sewists are paid well above New York City minimum wage. Picnic Wear offers minimal waste and maximum authenticity. Future vintage over future garbage. Cute Little Ruin is an online shop dedicated to providing quality vintage and secondhand clothing, vinyl, and home items in a wide range of styles and price points. If it's ethical and legal, we try to find a home for it. Vintage style with progressive values. Find us on Instagram at Cute Little Ruin. Is there a little bit of Italy in your soul? Are you an enthusiast of pre-loved decor and accessories? Bring vintage Italian style and history into your space with the Pewter Thimble. We source useful and beautiful things and mend them where needed. We also find gorgeous illustrations and make them print-worthy. Tarot cards, tea towels, and hand-picked treasures available to you from the comfort of your own home. Responsibly sourced from across Rome, lovingly renewed by fairly paid artists and artisans, with something for every budget. Discover more at thepewterthimble.com. Deco Denim is a startup based out of San Francisco, and it sells clothing and accessories that are sustainable, gender fluid, size inclusive, and high quality, made to last for years to come. Deco Denim is trying to change the way you think about buying clothes. Founder Sarah Mattis wants to empower people to ask important questions like, where was this made? Was this garment made ethically? Is this fabric made of plastic? Can this garment be upcycled? And if not, can it be recycled? Sign up at decodenim.com to receive $20 off your first purchase. They promise not to spam you and send out no more than 3 emails a month, with 2 of them surrounding education or a personal note from the founder. Again, that's decodenim.com. How do you get to that lower cost? How do you get a dress that used to cost you $17 that you could sell for $68? How do you get it to $7 to $8 to make? Well, you cut things. First, this is always the first thing in every meeting, swap the fabric. What can we get that's cheaper but looks expensive? Oh man, we love to say looks expensive in fashion. How do we make sure it has a nice hand feel? That's another thing. One thing I have learned in my career is that customers generally don't care if something is synthetic as long as it feels nice. And in fact, learned this through some really dark years of trying to make sweaters a successful business. Customers say they want wool and natural fibers, but they don't. They want a polyester blend because it's softer and not itchy. And yeah, it has driven me to distraction many, many times. When we swapped the fabric, inevitably, it was always a poly blend. And sometimes that first fabric swap into poly was still too expensive. So we had to find an even cheaper poly, right? Next, you cut the details, pockets, lining, say goodbye. I remember when sheer dresses were a major trend, we could make whole ass maxi dresses for very little money because we didn't have to worry about the cost of a lining. Trust me, it adds up. If you still can't hit the cost target, you start adjusting other things. Make the skirt a little bit shorter, change it from a long sleeve top to a 3/4 sleeves. Man, 3/4 sleeve moment, so good for business, so profitable. Get rid of the buttons or perhaps keep the buttons, but make them functionless. Get rid of the buttonholes because buttonholes, they cost money. Lose the zipper and add a keyhole. Put it in an elastic waist so you just pull it over your head. Everything becomes a highly diluted version of the original design. But most importantly, when you still can't hit it, you keep asking the factory or vendor for a lower price. And they go back and they recalculate to see what they can get. You keep going back and forth. Maybe they cut some staff for the project. Maybe they pay their workers a little bit less. Maybe they subcontract to a factory that pays its workers even less. Maybe that factory subcontracts to another factory that pays even less, or uses forced labor, or commits wage theft. No matter what, these lower prices from the factory are really money taken out of the pockets of humans. Someone is always not getting paid when you push the factory on pricing, yet that is a regular part of the process. There have been times where we have said, we cannot hit the cost with that factory. It's not the factory, it's the country. We got to move it to another country that has a lower minimum wage or less customs and duties for shipping over here. We're going to move it. So we'll say, okay, it's coming out of China. It's going to Bangladesh or what have you. This is how you get these low prices. Because here's the thing. I understand why people don't have a lot of money to buy clothes. I'm in the same boat, right? We're all in that boat because our employers underpay us. Because what we're paid isn't keeping up with the massive increases in the cost of living, especially housing, but so many more things, right? We don't have a lot of money. The problem is that these companies cannot accept making less profits. They could do things the right way and still hit the prices that we can afford, and people wouldn't have to suffer. And I cannot emphasize that enough. I've been spending a lot of time on TikTok lately, for better or worse. It's kind of giving me anxiety. It's a rough crowd to talk about fast fashion with. But it always comes back to that, like everyone, I understand you don't have much money. None of us do, right? We are not the problem here. It is these companies, but they are never going to change if we don't make them. This is not like oh, cool, just like let Forever 21 or Zara or Shein or Amazon operate on the honor system. I totally trust you all. This is not that situation. Change only happens when we get involved. Okay, so back to like fast fashion and how it all began. I feel like I'm telling you like a long epic story, like the Odyssey, but of fast fashion. Okay, so when low prices were no longer a unique selling point because everyone was pricing the same, it shifted into being the first to offer a trend, no matter how specific or small. And this changed everything. Now customers felt the drive to shop multiple times a week, whether that was by visiting a store or shopping online. In fact, as shopping shifted more and more online, retailers were able to offer even more new styles every day or week because they were no longer confined by what they could fit in a brick and mortar store. Remember I told you, as e-commerce was beginning, we were like, ooh, we can try more things. We don't have to cram them in. Now it explodes. But you know what else also happens? There's a lot more duds and a lot more stuff goes on sale and a lot more stuff never gets bought at all. Keep in mind, 30% of the clothes produced by the fashion industry every year are never sold to anyone. Anyone. That's 45 billion garments that no one ever buys. That's what happens when you're rushing. More and more things fall through the cracks and aren't good. Social media, man, I always say Instagram, every fast fashion retailer out there should be sending a fruit basket or a very high-priced edible arrangement to Instagram every week. I suppose now Shein should be doing the same for TikTok, but social media helped fuel fast fashion. These partnerships with influencers gave retailers a chance to normalize a steady flow of new clothes through outfit of the day posts. A lot of things that we take for granted now or even say out loud and they sound absurd, like you need a new outfit for every event. This is where it started. And every trend, no matter how fleeting, could be shown on Instagram or Tumblr. Tumblr, another big part of the rise of fast fashion, building more customer interest. People working within the industry, like me and all my friends and all my not friends, we were working faster with less time. Rather than planning months and months out, it sounds so luxurious now, it was all happening in 1 to 3 months. Everything shipped via air to save time, and of course, with less time, there were less fittings, if any at all, and less opportunities to get the product just right. The number of times I'd been in a fit session where we said, well, it'll fit someone. Oh, here comes something else for the sales section, right? Forever 21 and Zara had already proven, though, that customers prioritized price and newness over quality and fit. And so even when we were in those fit sessions saying, it'll fit someone, people still bought it. And we're just like, I'm used to things kind of not being great. I don't care. In fact, as retailers work to cut costs year after year after year, because that's how retail works, you always have to be more profitable this year than you were last year. They push the envelope in terms of just how shitty something could be and still be desirable. They had to do this to cover the costs of all the new things that were becoming the norm as more and more of us shopped online. For one, free shipping. If there's anything you've ever learned for Clothes Horse, it's that yes, free shipping does not exist. Someone is paying for it. It's the retailer, but also kind of the customer. So retailers covered that cost of free shipping by pushing down the costs of what they were selling, which meant squeezing factories and cutting the quality even more. And to be honest, they also took that cost out of their employees' paychecks, right? By not giving them raises, paying them less to begin with, cutting their benefits once again, cutting their hours if they were hourly, that kind of thing. Next, the kissing cousin of free shipping, it's free returns. And once free returns became the norm, everyone can thank Amazon for that, there was a tsunami of returned inventory that followed. In many places I have worked, 30% of the stuff we sold online every year was returned to us. Think about 30%, a third essentially. Guess what? Processing returns costs more than processing your order and shipping it to you in the first place because it takes more time to receive and spec and return items to inventory. You got to pay someone to do that, and it's really expensive. While there has been a lot of automation in terms of picking and packing orders, there has not been automation in returns. And so that was another way where retailers would have to cover that cost by taking out of other things, whether that was the product cost or what they were paying their workers or something else that maybe where both of those intersected. Then there's all the air shipping. Remember I mentioned lots of stuff shipping by air. And when I say that, I mean literally on an airplane. And we're talking the difference between, say, 25 cents a unit for shipping via a boat, but it'll take about 6 to 8 weeks, versus a couple of dollars a unit to ship via air, where you'll get it in a week or two. That was also covered by cutting corners and quality and paying staff less and on and on and on. This was a really big deal. I'm going to tell you in a little bit about going back to work for my first buying job, working for that company again. And one thing that blew my mind is that almost everything was shipping via air, because in the early part of my career, shipping via air was such a big deal because it was so expensive that you would have to write essentially a letter asking permission to do it. It would go to an executive who would have to sign off on it. Often you'd get called into their office and grilled about it, and maybe they would sign off on it or agree to let you ship half or a quarter of the order via air. It was a big deal. Now it was the norm. It blew my mind. So guess what? We're covering all these expenses. Quality got worse in the products, right? Working in the industry got worse. Customers did not push back. At some point, we accepted clothing as quasi-disposable. Of course, the spoiler here is that those clothes live for centuries in landfills when we're done with them. By 2015, every big-ish retailer had adopted the fast fashion model. Any mall store, Anthropologie, Free People, American Eagle, Old Navy, Target, any online brand, including the ones where I worked, Nasty Gal and ModCloth. And oh my God, did what it meant to work in the corporate offices of these retailers change over those years between 2008 and 2015. Remember how I was maybe buying a total of 50 new items per month across my 5 categories in the beginning? By 2012, I was buying 50 to 100 styles per month per category. Sometimes 500 styles every month just in my categories. At ModCloth, we launched new styles every single day. Everywhere else, we were launching a couple hundred styles every week. And markdowns became a weekly thing. When you're bringing in so much product, like I was saying, there's a lot of duds, and things have to move out of stores even faster. They have to move off the website even faster. So I would spend time every week creating new markdown lists and talking things through with my planner. And even the process of creating that markdown list took a lot more time because we had so many more styles than we ever had in the past. This meant we were working all the time. Forget about 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. It was 9 to 8 or 9 to 9, and also working on Saturday, maybe for a few hours on Sunday. Dinner became some trail mix or a protein bar, and we would start drinking in the office around 6, anything to feel better, because everyone was not feeling great. When you have hundreds of new styles, and you have to create new markdown lists, and you need time to do sales analysis and manage your budget and go to meetings and train your team and so much more, well, there's not enough time for any of it. Everything felt so chaotic. In general, the entire industry had worked on a calendar similar to my first job. But now I was buying some stuff for 3 months from now, alongside writing orders for things that would arrive in 2 weeks or less, because that was the other thing. The industry was so afraid of making a mistake, of missing a trend, of adding yet another dud to the list, that corporate teams across every brand out there were changing the process of product development. Now we had special teams that just focused on designing and sourcing stuff that we could get in a few weeks. As buyers, we worked with them and outside vendors and our own design team to deliver more and more new styles without planning too far in advance. I was once yelled at for writing an order that wouldn't be arriving for 4 months, even though that used to be the standard. At the same time, brands were barely hanging on. So much smoke and mirrors in retail in general, but especially in that time period, because it was hard to make the math, well, math in the fast fashion model. Layoffs became the norm. I was laid off once when Nasty Gal went under, but I witnessed layoffs every few months from 2012 to 2016. No one's job was safe. There was no sense of security. And every time someone was laid off or quit, they were never replaced. Rather, their work was just passed off to someone else. So many times I found myself doing the work of 2, 3, even 4 different people with no raise or promotion. This was standard in all departments. So, random layoffs, stagnating pay, increasing workload, a diet based on protein bars and food from Starbucks, working on products that were frankly disappointing and kind of removed the creativity from it all. Yeah, it became harder to feel lucky to be there. But the outside world still thought that what we were doing was glamorous. Multiple people definitely dated me because of what I did for a living. It seemed appealing, right? It forced many of us into sort of gaslighting ourselves into believing that we were lucky. Even if most days we were trying not to have stress diarrhea in the communal bathroom or trying to hide our exhaustion-induced eye twitch in meetings. Whew. Whenever I tell these stories, I immediately am like teleported back to the Nasty Gal offices where the rugs were also infested with fleas and I was constantly covered with flea bites. It was gross there. You know, during this whole time period, I had a lot of friends who were still working in retail, now often as district or regional leaders, but still out there. And their stories were similar. You know, payroll continued to be cut to a point where like stores couldn't stay on top of their regular tasks. So much new product was pouring into stores and going on markdown so fast that everyone was just like frantically trying to re-merchandise the store with half the staff of previous years. My first employer had slashed its visual teams out in the stores. This was the thing that had been like the linchpin of their branding. They were slashing it, getting rid of it. They laid off a ton of amazing creative talent that had worked for the company for a long time. And in fact, longtime employees were being pushed out because they cost too much. You know, workers' rights have always been an issue in the fashion and retail industry, always. But very few people were talking about it ever. And in this century, it just got bigger and bigger. But still, no one was talking about it. And it's so frustrating because fast fashion really made all of these issues even more egregious. They'd always been human rights issues, but they were getting a lot worse. And it was really tough to be working in fashion or retail pre-2020 and have the whole world be oblivious and think that this was just this like glamorous industry. In 2018, I returned to that big campus where I'd begun my career. And this time I was helping to launch a new rental brand. After being away for almost 10 years, the impact of the fast fashionification of the industry was stark. Like the costs of the items we were buying in 2018 were lower than the prices we were paying 10 years before, like markedly lower. The timelines were so short, with a lot of product arriving the same month it was ordered. The sheer amount of new styles being ordered every week was wild. In fact, some of the brands on campus had shifted the task of managing the financial analytical side of product, of buying, to new roles so that buyers could spend all of their time searching for new things to buy and do nothing else. And as I mentioned earlier, almost everything shipped via air, like literally on an airplane. That one just blew my mind. This is fast fashion 1.0. And the thing is, it's so much slower than where we're moving right now in the era of fast fashion 3.0. Like, that's the thing. This looks antiquated in comparison to where we're finding ourselves now. And I think it's because for all of the wild changes in the industry that happened in the first 20-ish years of this century, many things remained the same. For one, the way product made its way to customers didn't really change. First, buyers would write an order, then it would be produced and shipped, often, overseas. At the port, it was screened by customs and inspected if there was a suspected issue. And in recent years, actually, customs agents would also be looking for any warning signs that a shipment might have been made with forced labor. It would usually start with like where it originated, and then maybe they would do some deeper investigation, get a statement from the brand, etc. Then, when it cleared customs, it would be loaded up on a truck and shipped to the brand's warehouse. There, it would be received, QA'd, at least partially by a team. Usually, there's a team in there that does like QAs 10% of every order just to make sure it's in line with what was ordered. Then it's packed up to go out to stores or put into bins, where it will wait until it's ordered by a customer. And if it ships out to stores, it gets unpacked there, where another set of humans will look at it and notice any major quality issues or concerns. And then, of course, it will be put out on the sales floor for customers to purchase. That's how fast fashion 1.0 works, and it's not much different in that regard than any of its predecessors. If you take a step back and look at this process, you see a few things. One, there are a lot of points where a safety or quality issue could be caught. Two, it's harder to import items made with forced labor. And three, you see a lot of humans, meaning jobs, as part of that chain. Customs inspectors, dock workers, truck drivers, warehouse workers, QA staff, store employees. Some of these jobs pay terribly. And don't get me started on warehouses that aren't climate controlled. But in the world of fast fashion 3.0, a lot of these jobs no longer exist. And we'll be talking more about how and why that is next week. In fact, fast fashion 1.0 involves a lot of humans and jobs that kind of begin to disappear as we get to fast fashion 3.0. Designers, buyers, production teams, fit models, technical designers, print designers. A lot of the corporate staff kind of disappears. The fashion of fashion goes away. Because particularly the jobs that disappear are those who are involved in the creation and curation of clothing. You kind of wonder who will be left to feel lucky to be there. Ultimately, as we wrap up fast fashion 1.0, we see a system that has many, many problems. For workers in all areas, there is low pay, high stress, too much work, and declining benefits. And that's not just garment workers and designers, etc. We're talking about retail staff, warehouse workers, truck drivers, and the staff in thrift stores who have to sort through all the rejected fast fashion and really fast everything stuff that we bought and didn't want to keep. In fact, fast fashion exacerbates economic inequality. It pushes down wages because so many people are employed directly or tangentially in the process of making, selling, and shipping new clothes. And then, of course, dealing with the waste left over when those clothes are no longer desirable. With so many people involved, of course, the wages paid to those workers become part of the norm for all workers. And for customers, the product isn't great. It doesn't last, it doesn't fit, and it makes us feel, well, kind of shitty. And we spend our money on it, often needing to buy more of it more often because it's not great. So we're spending even more money than we might have before the fast fashion era, even though clothes are cheaper. That's not great for our financial health either. And that's not great for our financial health either. And then, of course, there is the environmental impact of it all. Clothes shedding microplastics. As of right now, 65 to 70% of new clothes are made of petroleum-based synthetic fabrics that are essentially plastic, that shed microplastics when we wear them, when we wash them, when we dry them, when they exist. Then there's the pollution, the water consumption, the carbon footprint of all of those airplane trips for clothing, the landfills and waterways that are filling with unwanted clothing. There's literally mountains of unwanted fast fashion forming in the global south. And guess what? That impacts all of us, no matter where we live. Ultimately, this is a system that impacts every one of us, all of us, you, me, and everyone we know, period. I can't help but think about how the online outrage against secondhand resellers, for example, is really missing a much larger and more damaging issue. I get it. It's easier to pile on resellers than to confront larger systemic issues that will require work and change from every single person. But guess what? This shit affects all of us, no matter where we live, how much money we have, or what we wear on our bodies. We all have to care about this. I will just remind you all that calling out fast fashion isn't about shaming the people who buy it. You don't know what you don't know. And let's be honest, most of us aren't making enough money to afford higher end things, or we don't have time to shop secondhand or access to good secondhand options, or it's hard to find our size. So no, we're not going to be here and shame people about this or judge them. We're recognizing, when we have these conversations, we are recognizing that fast fashion isn't a good deal for anyone. And what we're doing is we're starting conversations that turn into a community, that grows into a movement, that pushes for a way of doing business that stops prioritizing profits over people and planet. The goal here is buying less and holding the industry accountable, not making people feel bad. It's about pushing for systemic changes via our power as voters and customers. One thing that I've learned in my career in buying is that only two things make companies change their ways, and that's laws and the fear of losing sales. So let's change some minds together. Let's get more people to talk about what we're talking about. Okay, so this is part 1. I'll be back next week with part 2, where we will really go into a little bit about what fast fashion 2.0 is. Honestly, it didn't last long because then Shein swooped in, and that's fast fashion 3.0. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about how, you know how fast fashion 1.0 really caught on and changed everything about how we shop, but people back in the beginning thought it was just a flash in the pan that would fizzle out? I hear people saying that kind of thing about Shein, about fast fashion 3.0, and I'm not so sure. So the other thing we're going to talk about is if fast fashion 3.0 becomes the way all retail works, what are the impacts of all of that? And I want to assure you, it impacts people in an even bigger way than fast fashion 1.0. So we'll talk about all that next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Clothes Horse. Hosted, written, researched, edited, all the things by me, Amanda Lee McCarty. I'm seriously probably about to get heat stroke because I've been recording for so long with the air conditioner. And I need to go make some dinner. If you liked what you're hearing, please leave a rating or a review. But most importantly, tell all your friends. That's how we get more people involved in what we're doing. And guess what? We have to get more people involved in what we're doing. If you'd like to support my work financially, you can learn more at patreon.com/clotheshorsepodcast, or you can buy the $2.99 per month Apple Premium subscription, which gives you access to all of our archives. But most importantly, it just says, hey, I'm supporting Clothes Horse, and that's pretty cool. And thanks, as always, to my other half, Dustin Travis White, for our music, for our audio support, and for helping me try to figure out a monitor that doesn't strain my eyes. All right, see you all next week. Bye.